He was just a poor student struggling to pay his rent, skipping meals to save a few coins, and dreaming of a future that seemed impossible. Then, out of nowhere, came her a 71-year-old millionaire woman with silver hair, elegance in every gesture, and eyes that had seen decades of love and loss. When he married her, the world called him a gold digger. But 7 days later, what he saw inside her mansion turned his entire life upside down. Welcome to heart-stirring stories, where every tale reminds you how unpredictable life and love can be. Today's story is about a young man who thought he'd made the smartest decision of his life, marrying wealth to escape poverty. But fate had other plans, because sometimes what looks like fortune hides a truth that money could never buy. Ethan was 24, a university student with bright dreams and empty pockets. Every morning, he walked past coffee shops filled with people who looked alive, expensive suits, perfect hair, and hands holding phones worth more than his yearly tuition. He often wondered what it would feel like to live just one day without worrying about money. He worked part-time at a bookstore and spent his nights studying under a flickering lamp in his tiny rented room. Life was hard, but he had learned to smile through it until the day he received an eviction notice. His landlord wanted the rent immediately or he'd have to leave. Ethan's savings were gone, his exams were near, and no one was willing to lend him money. That evening, desperate and exhausted, he sat alone in a park, his backpack beside him, staring blankly at the darkening sky. That's when he noticed her, a woman, perhaps in her 70s, dressed in a long cream-colored coat, sat a few benches away feeding pigeons. She had a calm grace about her, not the kind of wealth that shouts, but one that whispers through quiet confidence. A gust of wind blew her scarf onto the ground near Ethan's feet. He picked it up and walked over. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said softly, holding out the scarf. She smiled a kind, fragile smile. "Thank you, young man, you have gentle eyes." Her voice trembled slightly, but there was warmth in it. They talked for a while about the weather, the city, the loneliness of big places. Ethan, who rarely spoke about himself, found his heart opening to her kindness. She introduced herself as Margaret Sinclair, a widow who once owned an art gallery. Her husband had passed away years ago, leaving her with wealth but not happiness. "Money can fill your home," she said quietly, "but not the silence in it." Over the next few days, Ethan met her often at the same park. They talked about art, books, and the meaning of life. She started bringing him sandwiches and coffee, saying he reminded her of her late son, who had died young. Ethan, who had lost his parents long ago, began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: belonging. But one day their conversations took a turn. "Ethan," she said gently, "you have a kind soul, and yet I see pain in your eyes. Tell me, what is it that you truly want from life?" He hesitated. "I just want stability, I guess, to stop worrying about where my next meal will come from, to take care of someone and be taken care of." Margaret studied him for a moment, then said something that stunned him. "What if I told you I could give you that?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" She smiled faintly. "I mean companionship. I'm alone, Ethan, terribly alone. I don't have family left. I have everything except someone who cares whether I wake up in the morning. I don't want to die that way." Her next words shook him to the core. "I want to marry you." For a moment, Ethan thought she was joking. He even laughed awkwardly, but her eyes were serious. "I'm 71, Ethan. I don't have many years left. You'd inherit my estate one day. Yes, but more than that, I want someone to share my days with, someone sincere, someone who won't treat me like a relic." His heart pounded. The offer sounded unreal, almost absurd. A poor student marrying a millionaire widow. The world would mock him. Yet, the thought of never worrying about rent again, it tempted him more than he wanted to admit. That night he couldn't sleep. He thought about the woman who'd shown him nothing but kindness and the life she was offering. Maybe it wasn't about love. Maybe it was about survival. Maybe destiny had finally smiled. A week later, under a pale afternoon sun, they got married in a small courthouse ceremony. She wore a soft blue dress. He wore his only suit. There were no guests, just two strangers stepping into an impossible story. The media caught wind of it within days. Young gold digger marries 71-year-old millionaire, screamed the headlines. Ethan ignored them, but the whispers hurt. His classmates laughed behind his back. His old friends disappeared, yet Margaret never wavered. She treated him with respect, kindness, and quiet affection. When he moved into her mansion, Ethan was overwhelmed. The house was enormous, filled with antique furniture, paintings worth millions, and endless hallways that seemed to lead nowhere. But despite all the luxury, it felt empty, like a museum built for ghosts. Margaret gave him his own study, told him he could continue his education, and even offered to pay his tuition. "You're my husband now," she said. "I want you to live your dreams." Ethan nodded, though part of him still felt out of place. He didn't know how to act, how to hold her hand in public, how to speak in gatherings, how to respond when servants called him sir. The house staff respected him, but there was something strange in their eyes, a mix of pity and fear. On the 7th day of their marriage, Margaret told him she had a surprise. "I want to show you something tonight," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It's something I've never shown anyone." That evening, she led him down a narrow staircase that descended into the basement. The air grew colder, the lights dimmer. Ethan followed, confused and slightly uneasy. At the end of the hall stood a large steel door with an electronic lock. She pressed her thumb on the scanner, and the door clicked open. Inside was a room he never expected, walls lined with old photographs, shelves of diaries, and in the center, a glass case containing a faded wedding gown and a portrait of a young man who looked eerily like him. Ethan froze. "Who is that?" he whispered. Margaret's eyes glistened. "That was my son." The resemblance was haunting, the same jawline, the same gentle eyes, even the same dimple when he smiled. Ethan felt a chill crawl up his spine. "You remind me so much of him," she said softly. "The day I met you in the park, I thought I was seeing a ghost." She turned to him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I know people think I married you out of loneliness, but truth is, I married you because I couldn't let go of the memory of him. Maybe it's selfish, maybe it's madness, but in your presence, I feel like I got a piece of him back." Ethan didn't know what to say. He wanted to comfort her, but the revelation unsettled him. He realized now that their marriage was not built on love, but on grief, on memory, on something too deep to name. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about that room, the portrait, the glass case, the strange resemblance. And then he remembered something. The initials on the wedding gown's tag M.S. were the same as his late mother's name, Mary Scott. A thought struck him so violently that he sat up in bed, trembling. Could there be a connection? He hurried to the old documents Margaret kept in her study: birth certificates, property papers, photos. His hands shook as he flipped through them. Then, on one faded document, he saw it, a birth record for Michael Sinclair, born in the same hospital, the same year as his mother's long-lost twin brother. The air left his lungs. His mother had told him once that she had a twin who'd gone missing during childhood, a story she never spoke of again. And now, here he was married to that twin's mother. He stumbled back, horrified. That meant Margaret was his great-aunt. Ethan's head spun. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Everything began to make sense: the resemblance, her instant attachment, the emotional connection she couldn't explain. He stared at the dark ceiling that night, realizing his marriage wasn't a blessing or a curse, but a secret fate had written long ago, and what he was about to uncover next would change everything he thought he knew about family, inheritance, and love. Ethan sat frozen in Margaret's grand study, the dim light flickering over the papers scattered before him. His hands trembled as he held the birth record, the proof that shattered the fragile story he'd built in his mind. He wasn't just her husband, he was, by blood, her own family. The next morning, he avoided her eyes at breakfast. Margaret, however, noticed. "You're quiet today, Ethan," she said, sipping her tea. "Is something troubling you?" He forced a smile. Just tired, that's all, but inside, guilt gnawed at him. Every kind gesture she had shown now felt twisted by truth. The woman he had married out of desperation was, unknowingly, his great aunt. He wanted to run to escape the mansion that now felt like a tomb of secrets, yet a strange tenderness held him back. She wasn't a villain. She had saved him. Days passed in uneasy silence. Ethan spent hours in the library, researching old family archives, tracing every name, every date. Everything pointed to one truth: his mother and Margaret were blood relatives separated by tragedy. But what haunted him most was the question, did she know? One evening, he decided to confront her. He found her sitting by the piano, playing an old lullaby, her fingers trembling slightly with age. "Margaret," he began, his voice shaking, "I found something about our family." She stopped playing, her gaze distant. "Our family?" He took a deep breath. "My mother's name was Mary Scott. She had a twin brother, Michael Sinclair. He went missing as a child. I found his records in your files. That means She closed her eyes before he could finish. "Yes," she whispered, "I know." The world seemed to tilt beneath him. "You knew all this time?" Her voice cracked. "Not at first. When I met you in the park, I only saw a boy who reminded me of my son. But when you told me your mother's name, I began to suspect, and when I checked the records, I realized who you truly were. Then why did you still marry me?" he cried. Tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks. "Because I was afraid you'd leave. You don't understand, Ethan. I've lived in silence for decades. I lost my son, my brother, my entire family. When you appeared, it felt like God had given me one last chance to love again, not as a wife, but as someone who could care for you, protect you. But I knew the world wouldn't understand. So I said the only words that could keep you close. I asked you to marry me." Ethan's anger melted into confusion, sorrow, and compassion all at once. He fell silent, staring at the trembling woman before him, not a manipulator, not a monster, just a lonely soul who'd been too afraid to lose the only person she had left. He knelt beside her chair and took her hand. "Margaret, I don't know what to say." She looked at him with tired eyes. "Say you forgive an old woman for wanting to feel loved again." "I do," he whispered. "I forgive you." That night, for the first time since their marriage, Ethan felt peace. The truth, painful as it was, had set both of them free. He decided to stay not as her husband, but as family. They redefined their bond quietly, away from the eyes of the world. But peace never lasts long in stories like this. A week later, Margaret's health began to fail. She often lost her breath while walking, her hands shaking as she tried to pour tea. Doctors came and went, murmuring words like heart condition and stress. Ethan became her constant companion, reading to her, cooking simple meals, taking her on slow walks through the rose garden. One evening, she called him into her room. The sunset spilled golden light across her face, softening the wrinkles of time. "Ethan," she said weakly, "there's something I must tell you before I go." "Don't say that," he murmured, holding her frail hand. She smiled faintly. "No one escapes time, my dear. Listen, when I leave, I don't want you to mourn me as a wife or even as an aunt. I want you to remember me as a woman who finally found peace after losing everything." She reached into her bedside drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. "This is for you, but don't open it until after the funeral." Tears burned his eyes. "Margaret, promise me," she whispered. "I promise." 3 days later, she passed away quietly in her sleep. The mansion, once alive with her gentle presence, now felt unbearably empty. Ethan stood at her grave beneath a soft drizzle, the world around him silent except for the rustle of autumn leaves. After the burial, he returned home and sat before the fireplace, holding the envelope she'd given him. His heart pounded as he broke the seal. Inside was a letter written in her elegant handwriting and a key. He unfolded the paper and began to read. "My dear Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I've gone where pain can no longer touch me. You must know the truth, the full truth. I didn't just marry you to keep you close. I married you to protect what was rightfully yours. This mansion, the Sinclair estate, the gallery, and every asset I own, all of it, originally belonged to my brother, your grandfather. When he died in the war, his property was wrongfully claimed under my husband's name. I lived with that guilt for decades. I wanted to correct it, but by the time I learned of your existence, I was too weak to fight the legal system. So, I found another way. Through our marriage, I could transfer everything to you without a court battle. You are now the legal heir of the Sinclair legacy, the rightful owner of what was always meant to be yours. I know this truth may hurt, but it was my only way to give you the life your family was denied. I hope you use it with kindness and wisdom, not for luxury, but to bring light to others as you brought it to me. With all my love, Margaret Sinclair. Ethan's tears fell onto the letter, blurring the ink. He sat there for hours, clutching the page to his chest, realizing the depth of the sacrifice she had made marrying him, not out of desire or madness, but out of redemption. The next morning, he unlocked the old chest in her basement with the key she'd left. Inside were paintings, documents, and an old notebook, his grandfather's journal. It told the story of a family torn apart by greed and loss, of siblings who once promised to protect each other, and of a little boy who vanished in wartime chaos. Reading those pages, Ethan understood everything. Margaret hadn't been a lonely old woman clinging to the past. She had been the guardian of a legacy, waiting for someone worthy to restore it. Months passed. Ethan sold the mansion and used the wealth to open a scholarship foundation in Margaret's name, the Sinclair Hope Fund, helping students like him who dreamed big but had nothing. He kept her portrait in his office, the same soft smile that had once greeted him in the park. Every year on her birthday, he visited her grave with a single white rose and whispered, "Thank you for seeing me when the world didn't." In time, the story of the young man who married a 71-year-old millionaire became a legend in his city. People still whispered about it, some calling it scandal, others calling it strange love. But those who knew Ethan understood the truth. It wasn't a love story between a man and a woman. It was a story about kindness, fate, and the quiet redemption of two souls who healed each other in ways the world would never understand. And sometimes that's the kind of love that stirs the heart the most, the kind that doesn't follow reason, but destiny. In the end, Ethan learned that life doesn't always give us the love we expect. Sometimes it gives us the love we need. Margaret didn't enter his life to make him rich. She came to remind him that even the most broken connections can be healed by compassion. What began as a marriage of desperation became a bond of redemption, proving that kindness has the power to rewrite even the saddest destinies. Because in a world chasing money and youth, a poor student and a 71-year-old woman showed what truly matters, not how long love lasts, but how deeply it changes us.